The aroma of fresh coffee hung in the air of that grey morning, a fragrant veil attempting to disguise Eleanor's silent melancholy. In her early 20s, she moved between the coffee shop tables, a phantom in her worn but immaculate uniform. Her deep brown eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights and the urgency of overdue bills. Each plate delivered, each cup set down, was a small act of sacrifice, a repetitive dance that barely hinted at her complex inner tapestry. To most, Eleanor was just part of the furniture, an efficient blur that disappeared into the kitchen as soon as a need was met, her presence as constant as it was invisible. That morning, however, the overwhelming routine was subtly disrupted. A man, Mr. Reginald Thorne, occupied the table near the window, his imposing figure in a perfectly cut suit, exuding an aura of power and detachment. His gestures were precise, almost mechanical, and his gaze, cold and analytical, swept the room without truly seeing the people within it. As Eleanor served his coffee, a fleeting glimpse of something on his hand caught her attention. A ring on Mr. Thorne's ring finger, a golden ornament that somehow seemed familiar, like a distant echo of a forgotten melody. Mr. Thorne's ring gleamed under the filtered window light, a point of opulence in the coffee shop's simplicity. Eleanor felt a pang in her chest, a strange sensation that stopped her in her tracks. It was a specific design, a delicate engraving she knew from somewhere else, a place that resided deep within her emotional memory. Something about that object clashed with Mr. Thorne's calculating coldness, creating an intriguing dissonance. For an instant, the hurried pace of the coffee shop seemed to slow, and Eleanor, in her usual discretion, barely dared to whisper a thought that escaped her lips like a breath. "My mother has a ring just like that." Mr. Thorne, in his bubble of indifference, didn't even register the soft voice, waving her away with an impersonal dismissiveness. The ring, however, had already ignited a spark of curiosity in Eleanor's chest, a flicker that promised to set fire to the placidity of that day. Did you like the intro? Dive deeper into this story of resilience and discover what lies beneath the surface. Like, comment, and share to follow this emotional journey. Eleanor's life was a heavy burden of responsibilities. From a very young age, she traded her own dreams for the duty of caring for her mother, who unexpectedly fell ill. The years at the coffee shop were not a choice, but an urgent necessity due to hospital bills and a lack of other options. Every tired smile she gave to customers hid the pain of a stolen youth and the sacrifice of a dedicated daughter. She was a silent force, a rock that sustained her mother's world, even if no one else noticed the greatness of that act. Society saw her only as an ordinary employee, a replaceable piece, never imagining the depth of her strength and the love that moved her. Social invisibility was a constant part of her daily life. People came and went, ordered their coffees, hurried her with cutlery, but rarely truly looked her in the eyes. It was as if Eleanor was a shadow, a blurred background in the city's busy life. This indifference, however, did not make her bitter. On the contrary, it taught her to observe, to notice the small details that went unnoticed by those who only cared about their own world. Her only inheritance, the true treasure she possessed, were the memories of her mother before her illness, the unbreakable bonds of a love that neither sickness nor poverty could erase. Despite the exhaustive routine and lack of recognition, Eleanor maintained unshakable dignity. Her work clothes, simple as they were always immaculate, a reflection of her resistance to succumbing to defeat. The glint in her eyes, however faint, was the flame of hope that refused to be extinguished. She carried with her the story of a family that, despite adversity, clung to life with surprising strength. The ring she had seen on Mr. Thorne's finger for a moment pulled her from this mechanical routine, transporting her to a past that seemed to have re-emerged, bringing with it the memory of an old trauma, of a loss that still hurt. The memory of her mother's ring hammered at Eleanor's mind. She tried to approach Mr. Thorne again, courage mixing with the fear of being reprimanded. With a voice lower than usual, she risked, "Sir, forgive my intrusion, but your ring, it's very similar to one my mother had." Mr. Thorne barely lifted his eyes from the newspaper. An impatient wave of his hand, a clear sign of disdain, was the only response. It was the coldness of someone who saw the interaction as a mere annoyance, the arrogance of someone who didn't care about the words of a simple waitress. Eleanor felt the weight of his superior gaze, a look that made her feel even smaller, almost invisible. The tension escalated. When Eleanor, moved by a strong intuition and the importance of that ring to her family, a ring that had been stolen in a tragic event years ago, tried again. She approached the table once more, her voice almost a whisper, hoping to be heard. "It's just that this ring has a very specific engraving," she began, but was interrupted by an impatient sigh from Mr. Thorne. The disdain on his face was evident, and the way he averted his gaze made her retreat, embarrassed but not entirely, defeated. The atmosphere of the coffee shop, once noisy, now seemed quieter, as if the people around could feel the humiliation in the air. Chloe, the university student who was always at the coffee shop, observed everything from her table. She saw Eleanor's unease and Mr. Thorne's irritation. Something in the atmosphere of that coffee shop felt heavy, strange. One of Eleanor's colleagues, Frank, an older, cynical man, noticed the scene and whispered to her, "Let it go, Eleanor. People like them never care about people like us." The words, though meant to help, only reinforced the sense of injustice and the idea that Eleanor's voice, or anyone like her, held no value for people like Mr. Thorne. Chloe, the student normally engrossed in her books, began to look up more often. At first, Eleanor was just part of the scenery, someone who brought her daily coffee without much distinction. But the scene with Mr. Thorne, the silent humiliation Eleanor suffered, awakened something in her. Chloe's discreet curiosity transformed into attentive observation. She noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in Eleanor's hand when she picked up a cup, the way her tired smile seemed forced after that encounter. Chloe, who lived in a university bubble, began to see the complexities of life outside her reality. At first, Chloe didn't understand the depth of the situation. She shared, unknowingly, the same indifference as many other customers, seeing Eleanor as a service figure, not as a person, with a story. However, the clash between Mr. Thorne's arrogance and Eleanor's silent dignity made her reflect. The discomfort in the air, the way Eleanor seemed to shrink under Mr. Thorne's gaze, all of this was a new kind of lesson for Chloe, something no book could teach. She began to feel a strange empathy emerge, a recognition of another's pain that was previously unknown to her. With every gesture from Eleanor, every lost gaze into the void, Chloe felt a growing connection. She went from being a passive observer to someone who was, in a way, participating in the drama. The student realized that the true story wasn't just in books, but in the invisible lives around her, in the small daily battles fought by people like Eleanor. That moment in the coffee shop became a turning point for Chloe, opening her eyes to a broader and more painful reality, but also one full of unexpected human strength. The humiliation reached its peak. In a moment of Mr. Thorne's carelessness, when he was distracted by his phone, Eleanor approached the ring on his hand, not to touch it, but to observe the details more closely, almost as if trying to decipher a riddle. That design, the small engraving she knew was there, was the key to everything. She was so focused that she didn't notice Mr. Thorne putting away his phone and looking up. He caught her, hand outstretched, almost touching the object. A shiver ran down Eleanor's spine. The millionaire stared at her with a cold, cutting gaze, a silent judgment worth more than 1,000 words. In a low but threatening tone, Mr. Thorne reprimanded her. "What do you think you're doing, young lady? Don't you dare touch what isn't yours." The words, though spoken at an almost normal volume, echoed through the coffee shop, causing some customers to turn their heads, curious. Eleanor felt the weight of all eyes on her, a deep shame that burned her face. The insinuation of theft, the veiled accusation, made her feel small and powerless. But behind, the shame, the memory of her mother's ring, the only valuable thing left after the incident that changed their lives, propelled her forward. The image of her mother's ring, that same design, that same engraving, came back with force. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to control the tears that threatened to fall. It was more than a simple object. It was a link to her mother before her illness, a symbol of a happy life that was abruptly interrupted. The ring was the only material thing that represented her family's unity and her mother's resilience in the face of the tragedy that struck them. Even under Mr. Thorne's disdainful gaze and the murmurs of others, Eleanor felt a new strength, a tiny detail that kept her from backing down, a seed of a turning point sprouting amidst the humiliation. What will Eleanor do in the face of this accusation? The story is about to take a turn. Don't miss the next developments. Follow our profile and stay tuned for every emotion. Eleanor, gathering. All the courage she possessed, did not accuse Mr. Thorne. Instead, her voice, previously trembling, gained a strange firmness as she revealed the true story behind her mother's ring. It wasn't a complaint, but a painful truth, told with the simplicity of someone who had lived the pain. "Sir, this ring," she began, her eyes fixed on the object. "It has an internal engraving, a small A and an M intertwined, with the date 1985 just below." She described the design details with a precision that would only be possible if the ring was truly identical, or more importantly, if it was the same ring that had belonged to her mother. Eleanor's description, so exact and laden with raw emotion, hit Mr. Thorne like an unexpected blow. The millionaire, accustomed to seeing the world through the lens of power and money, was caught off guard by the young woman's vulnerability and dignity. He, who had always seen himself above any suspicion or responsibility, was forced to confront a truth that had haunted him for years, the memory of a questionable transaction. Mr. Thorne had bought that ring from an antique dealer of dubious provenance, a deal he always knew was morally questionable, but which he ignored for the piece's beauty and rarity. The engraving, the A and M intertwined, the date 1985. These were details he had noticed but had never linked to a personal story. Now, there, before Eleanor, the naked truth was revealed. It wasn't an accusation, but the poignant weight of a shared memory, of a life he had, involuntarily affected. The silence in the coffee shop was almost palpable, and Mr. Thorne felt not the weight of formal guilt, but the unmistakable pain of a silent epiphany, the understanding that this young woman's life was connected to that ring in a way he could never have imagined. A heavy silence fell over the coffee shop. The customers, who before had only gossiped or looked out of the corner of their eyes, now watched the scene with different attention. The air of judgment began to dissipate, replaced by a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. Mr. Thorne, the millionaire accustomed to commanding respect, felt the weight of curious glances, but now mixed with a new understanding. His rigid posture began to yield, and the disdain on his face gave way to an expression of shock and perhaps of belated pain. Eleanor's revelation had broken the barrier of indifference he had built over the years, exposing him to a truth that forced him to see. Beyond money. Chloe, the student witnessing everything, felt tears well up in her eyes. That moment was an epiphany. She no longer saw Eleanor as a mere waitress, but as a symbol of strength and dignity. Eleanor's life, once so invisible to her eyes, now revealed itself in its complexity, showing a resilience Chloe had never imagined. The student's initial indifference transformed into deep admiration and empathy. She understood that true greatness lay not in possessions, but in a person's ability to endure adversity with courage and maintain nobility amidst pain. The atmosphere of the coffee shop, once a stage for humiliation, was transformed by the intensity of that revelation. The usual buzz of conversations and the clinking of cups were replaced by an almost reverent respect. People who before barely noticed Eleanor now saw her with different eyes, perceiving the depth of her story and the strength of her spirit. The scene became a mirror, reflecting each person's own prejudices. Eleanor's simplicity and the truth of her story had the power to shake the superficiality of the world around her, forcing everyone to re-evaluate the true value of things. Mr. Thorne, the man who always saw himself above everyone else, uttered no words of apology. In a gesture worth more than any phrase, he stood from his chair, not to leave, but to approach Eleanor. With the hand that once displayed wealth, he took the ring off his finger. In a slow and deliberate movement, he extended it to Eleanor. It was not a donation, a favor to the waitress. It was a restoration, the return of something that belonged not to Eleanor, but to her history, to her pain. Mr. Thorne's gaze, previously cold, now revealed a profound recognition, a surrender to the truth that had been exposed in his heart. Eleanor took the ring, her hands trembling as tears streamed down her face. They were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion, a mixture of relief, joy, and the poignant longing for her mother. To find that object again, so precious and laden with memories, was like embracing a piece of her past. Chloe, a silent witness to the entire drama, was also moved, understanding the true richness of the moment. She saw that the value was not in the shining gold, but in the light that resided in Eleanor's soul, in her ability to maintain dignity and unwavering love. Eleanor's story echoes a timeless lesson. True nobility lies not in material fortune, but in the resilience of the human spirit and the ability to maintain dignity even in the face of the greatest adversities. It is a touching reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that every life hides a complex tapestry of experiences, pains, and victories. Empathy, however challenging, is the bridge that connects souls, revealing the humanity in each of us. It is not about the gold that shines on the finger, but about the light that resides in the soul, that which, like the ring that returned, finally finds its true home. Did this story touch you? If so, like this script, leave your comment about the message it conveyed, and subscribe to our channel for more narratives that inspire and move. Your interaction is the light that drives